Hello, and welcome to BT Media's In Conversation With series. Today I welcome Ashanti Bentil-Dhue, CEO of EventMind, founder of Diversity Alley and Black in Events. Good morning, Ashanti.
Hi.
Actually, it's good afternoon. It's 12:19. So
it is afternoon, and thanks for having me.
And we're live in South London. I think you're my first guest from South London.
Probably. Yeah.
Probably. That's probably a prejudice there, right? Straight away.
I'm usually the first of nearly a lot of things.
Well, that's a good thing. Ashanti, you're obviously doing lots of things at the moment, and we're going to come and talk about, I guess, what you were doing pre-pandemic EventMind in a bit, because I'm very keen, and my viewers will be very keen to get your experience, views on virtual events and social media, etc. But I'd like to start with, if you can tell us more about Diversity Ally and how that came about, and also your role in Black in Events. Yeah,
absolutely. So ironically, pre-COVID, I had trained really to become a practitioner in diversity and inclusion. Very, very particular niche, which was talking about racial diversity, so helping UK organisations to increase their racial diversity within their employee cohorts. And so I've been doing a lot of diversity work in the background because my foundational career and training is in finance and legal. So I work for big banks and Financial Ombudsman Service. And of course, diversity is an issue there. And that's where I really cut my teeth on understanding the challenges that UK organisations are experiencing in this regard. And so I'd been doing this work. And then, of course, George Floyd happened. And, the two things kind of came together because ultimately, the reality is I don't see many people who look like me in the events industry, particularly when you're talking about trade shows and exhibitions.
There's many short, bald white people. I see lots of me knocking around.
So and so it's a different experience, which sometimes I don't have time necessarily to think about in any great depth, because in terms of my bread and butter business, we do what we do. But it is something that I think the events industry is just perfectly poised to be a role model with regards to, and that is diversity. And so then I met my co-founder, Gabby, I call her Gabby, but Gabrielle Austin Brown. And her and I decided that we should come together as two practitioners and serve the events industry specifically to help them become more diverse and inclusive.
Right. And we're going to go and talk about a bit more how people get involved in a second. When you say the events industry, I've had lots of conversations with people who have been frustrated that actually, because the events industry is such a broad church, that at this time they're not being represented, their parts not being represented enough to government. What does events industry mean to you in the context of Black in Events and Diversity Ally?
Absolutely, that's a great question. So principally, our work has been with the associations, membership groups and bodies, and large events agencies, exhibition companies. So we're mostly focused on medium to large sized corporates.
Okay. And that's across the whole gamut of events.
It is.
Even if someone putting a live event, like a concert, or a trade show organizer, it's the whole.
Absolutely, because here's the thing: you've got culture, image, and people. Those are the three areas that we often have to look at diversity within the lens of. Okay, so the culture of your organization or business, and then you've got the image, so the how you're perceived, but also what imagery you use in your marketing, and then you've got your people. What does your senior leadership team look like? What does your employee cohort look like? Who are you paying? And so those three areas are the main areas that we look at when we're looking at diversity and inclusion. And so that's why we are looking at medium to large size corporates or organizations or companies that would self-identify in many ways as an events body or company.
Because I was thinking about this, and obviously I'm going to be ignorant in many things I say, and that's actually part of what I want to talk to you about in a minute, having the conversation. Because I would think sort of live events, and I'm thinking concerts and all that sort of thing, are very diverse, right? In terms of performers, musicians, that sort of thing. So that's why I didn't know if there was a distinction between who you're trying to go after.
So that's a really good question. So this is something as well that is a good question, basically, because the mere presence or existence visibly of diversity does not indicate true diversity. Okay. So what we tend to find, especially with social media and certain industries like music and entertainment, is yes, there are high numbers of, maybe proportionally, entertainers of color.
Yeah.
The question is, though, how are they being paid? How much are they being paid? Right, and what is their access to infrastructure? Okay, so classic look is, an artist, a music artist, is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
You've got the managers, you've got the agents, you've got the record companies, etc., etc. Right. Now, that infrastructure quite often is making a lot of money, long-term, consistently, forever, off of that entertainer. And that entertainer may not actually be making the money that their work and also their creative property, their intellectual property actually represents. And so it's a really good question that you've got. Yes, in entertainment, in music, there are lots of entertainers of color, for example.
Yeah.
But the issues are in terms of equal access
to
resources, power, and authority.
Yeah, interesting. I think the word power is very important, isn't it? Because having read up definitions of racism and all that sort of thing, power, it's if someone's powerful and then they like a Donald Trump or someone like that.
Yes.
That's the definition probably of someone that's being racist, because they're using that power to
disadvantage, exclude. Yeah. And so here's the three things that I always talk about is access, resource, and power.
Yeah.
Those three things combined, are what we need to redistribute. So when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, what we're really talking about is the redistribution, the fair redistribution of power, access, and resources for all. Yeah,
that makes absolute sense. Does it depress you, Ashanti, that we're having conversations like this, or we need to have conversations like this? I know they say in 2020, but whatever, now,
Yeah. I think the reality is this is life, isn't it? The same way we're always having conversations about how to make more sales, how to market more effectively in the B2B space. Unfortunately, this is going to be one of those conversations that continues. And I think it is also because of the transitory nature of life. Some of the things that we talk about now, like neurodiversity, like pronouns, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, were not being discussed. Because the world is constantly changing. If we look at Generation Z, for example, and what they want from life, how they relate to each other, how they relate to the brands that they work with and they buy from, that generation didn't exist 30, 40 years ago. And so I think it's just a reality of life that we will always have conversations as human beings about how we, again, distribute power, access, and resources.
Yeah. But I guess, like, from a gender perspective, and I was having this conversation with Lou Kiwanuka yesterday. Not that she agreed with me. I would sit here as a middle-aged white man thinking, well, actually, women have done quite well over the last 100 years, and they're very represented. Not that she agreed with me.
So I have to say I can understand why she disagrees, because again, it's that difference between, there's two things: what you see visibly. And secondly, what you see visibly, but also your micro versus macro, right? So you might know in your personal life women who are successful. And that is a very subjective term, but if you're talking about maybe how much they earn or the seniority that they have within their organization, on a micro level, you might be able to look around you and notice women like that.
Sure.
When you look at the macro statistics and reality, it's different. Okay, so for example, if you and then you add in a third layer, as we talked about, power, resource, and access. So just because, for example, the events industry, I think, is just over 50% of women, but when you look at the senior positions where there's power, resource, and access, they're missing for the most part. And this is why what we see visually isn't always a true reflection of the actual movement that we want to see for all.
But I think, and possibly, I'm not going to put words into your mouth, we could agree that if I take the events industry and I take a small slice of where I was at in terms of trade shows, and I look at the bodies, the AEO, Assor, AEV, I look at some of the big organisers, there is representation at senior level from a female perspective, okay? Not from a black or other ethnic minority perspective.
Yeah.
I think that's what I sort of meant.
Yeah, and that makes sense. Yeah, you can see it. There is progress, I suppose, if you compared it to 10 years or 20 years ago. But what we want to see is that representative of the existence of these parties in the industry. Let
me ask you a question. It's not my view.
It's okay.
But why do you think companies need to be diverse?
Yeah, it's a good idea. So there's many a business case for diversity, but honestly, I could talk to them blue in the face about it. One of the key things, though, is this: that Generation Z, who are the next buying power generation, that is what they care about. They are diverse, not only in terms of their actual representation, but in the way they think. And they expect that from the brands that they buy from and the brands that they work with. So any company who isn't already, by the way, looking at Generation Z insights, period, you're behind the curve. And one of the key things to understand about them is that diversity and inclusion and the demonstration of commitment to those values is important. So look at something like sustainability. And how even millennials feel about sustainability. It has moved the markets to start being more sustainable because that is what their customers want and expect. And we're seeing the companies who do that, they're getting an increase because these people are thinking, yes, I want to buy from a company that is seeking to be more sustainable. The same will be the case when it comes to diversity and inclusion. And it's not just about having people there visually, it's also about the new ideas and therefore the new products and services that are born from that. There's this brilliant, I follow a lot of agencies and companies who really focus on disabled persons. There's a brilliant marketing agency that's working with big brands. How do you engage individuals who are disabled, who identify as disabled? That is a whole consumer. No one said they don't work. They've got money. Why aren't you trying to make sure that you're being inclusive? And so this is the key thing here. It's really just a matter of sustainability in terms of your profitability. You will be behind the curve if you don't start looking at this.
I think you make a very good point there about sustainability, the whole environmental, the incentives and disincentives that are put in place by government, and I'll talk to you about that in a minute. And I'm not going to say it's less emotional because people do get emotional about it, but perhaps it's less emotional in that respect than race.
It is. I mean, the thing is, obviously, for those who really believe in the safeguarding of the planet and animals, but this is ironic. We've come to a place where we acknowledge that we need to recycle properly. For example, we come to a place where we acknowledge we should be reusing materials to make things that we use very regularly. Why aren't we in a place where we think we should actually include other human beings who buy from us?
When you put it like that, it's bizarre, isn't it?
It's a very bizarre debate to continue to have. So it's not depressing from your earlier question. It's just more bizarre to me that these are your people, these are customers, these are consumers. They already buy from you. And if you tapped into those markets in a specific, intentional way, you just make more money. So I don't understand why you don't want to do it.
Unconscious bias. Again, I've been thinking about this. I think that's a cop-out and actually doesn't exist. And people, it's absolutely conscious bias.
I'm glad, but you're the first white male who's asked me this question.
Because I do. I'm going to be honest with you. I think that's BS.
It is. I've had this debate online on LinkedIn as well, because there are people who seriously believe in unconscious bias. I think that, look, the results speak for themselves. This is a training, this is a theory, this is an ideology, a concept that has been floated in corporate spaces for years. And trainings are based on this theory. And we still find ourselves in a situation in 2020 where less than 1% of senior positions in this country, in any sector, are held by Black women, right? They don't even have a percentage. So if that unconscious bias training was working,
yeah,
we wouldn't see statistics like this at all. And so I think that what people don't realize, there's a power in recognizing that you have more influence than you want to admit.
Yeah.
The fact of the matter is, we can form habits in environments where we're not being challenged, where we're not being checked, where it's not being addressed. So it becomes a habit, but it's not unconscious. I believe that these are habitual behaviors in environments, like I said, that don't have those check and balances. Whereas if you did have more check and balances within your company, you would find that you are able to change those habits, even if it's a gradual change.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. It's something I've been thinking about. I just think it's too easy for people to say, oh, I unconsciously said, what? You don't unconsciously do something. It's just, anyway. How do you start a conversation about race in a business?
Yeah, good question. So
I'm full of them today, aren't I?
Yes, you are. And often I don't even get asked these questions. But the first thing is that this is the first time ever individuals are being asked to talk about race in the workplace with permission from their employer. So it's a very, very new thing, a new conversation. And so one of the things that we always recommend is some ground rules and laying some foundations in place. We call it kind of conscious or brave conversations, okay? Because it does require being brave.
Yeah.
So we need to lay foundation first, essentially. As an employer, you shouldn't just be like bringing this up and saying, right, we're going to meet on Zoom on Tuesday. Tell me what you think about racism. That does not work at all. So it's about setting some boundaries in place in terms of no judgment, no shame, no blame. So you want to, and the reason why organizations find this challenging is because there are plenty of other conversations that we have in the workplace that we avoid. And that we don't know how to have in a productive way. So it's not just the conversation about race, which, yes, is a hard conversation, but it often speaks to the overall culture that already exists if we're not able to have these challenging conversations. So you want to lay some foundations and you want to be open and transparent as an employer or organization about why you're asking for employees to engage in the conversation. That's the first thing. The second thing is you have to be prepared as an organization for the feedback you might get. Because what often happens when we say to people, tell me how you feel. I've got an open desk policy. When people actually tell you how they feel, we become quite defensive or dismissive.
Like me and my wife.
It's a human thing. It is a human thing. Okay. And so that's the second step that an organization, it needs to prepare itself for the feedback that it might not be expecting. Because if you, depending on how you respond to that feedback, you are either building trust, grace, and transparency, or you're breaking that down. So when people come back to you and they say, actually, this is what I've experienced, or this is how I feel, that is your opportunity as an organization to build trust with your employees.
Yeah.
And that is the point at which you say, thank you for sharing that. We weren't aware of, or we accept that we may have let the ball drop on this one.
Sure.
We need to go away and think about how we address this. Give us some time and we'll get back to you.
Yeah. And it's just, it's a strange one at the moment. So there's lots of talk about all different issues, including race, right? Social media everywhere. People are saying the right things. Sometimes people are saying the wrong things. People, including myself, are also scared to say anything.
Yes.
In case they say the wrong thing. We only had an issue yesterday, and I don't know whether he meant it or didn't mean it, with the chairman of the FA.
Okay, yes. Right. Yes.
Now, he said he mixed his words up, whether he did or he didn't. And actually, in his position, I guess you can't afford to mix your words up. But in a funny way. So, like, the awareness of it all was being raised, but almost now people are too scared to talk about it. How do we get over that?
Well, that goes back to the fact that as human beings, we avoid hard conversations. We avoid conversations that may reveal we may not know something. That's a big part of this.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people are recognizing they don't actually know what they're talking about, that this is a completely new topic, and you may not have considered. You might have a friend of color, a partner of color, a colleague of color that you like, that you respect, that you socialize with, but you still may not have really thought about what their lived experience might be like at work, or when they walk into the supermarket, or when they're just driving, you know, to the local shop and they get stopped by the police. These are all things that just are outside of your parameters, really. And so it is a hard conversation. Now, when you take that into the workplace, when you are a senior leader, a chief exec, you are a hiring manager, you're a people manager, you now have to be vulnerable and transparent with people who are looking up to you, who you lead, and say, actually, I didn't have any idea this was happening, or I did know it was happening, but I didn't know how to deal with it, which is why we haven't really done anything. So it takes some vulnerability and courageous leadership at this point to acknowledge that the ball may have been dropped. But as I said, it is really an opportunity to win some trust and grace from your employees if you're willing to be honest.
And I guess that's where a company like your Diversity Ally comes in, right? So if I'm leading an organization of 200 staff, I want to start the conversation. I'm, excuse my French, shit scared of doing it because I don't know, I could say
don't know where to start.
All this sort of stuff. They can rely, they can lean on. How does your company do that?
Yeah, so the first thing that we always do is conduct a very discreet and private conversation with leadership and those who are in positions of authority, who do hiring, who touch talent development, for example. That's the first thing. And we wish that more organizations did that, because you could save yourself things like whistleblowing, public scandal on social media. But it's all around this, A, avoiding the conversation altogether, and B, what we have seen some companies do is they've scurried and thought, okay, let's put together a diversity committee, which is interesting because you're not actually changing the ingredients in the bowl. It's the same people in the same organization now starting diversity committees. What are you going to achieve with those same people? It's really important at this point to engage experts who can facilitate the conversation, who can also, you know, act as shock absorbers, because as I say, these conversations aren't pretty. And they're not easygoing conversations, because they're never conversations that have been had before in the workplace with permission. So that's my advice to organizations.
As I guess they would do with HR. That's why they're HR departments, right? So, you know, if there's an issue, they're there as that buffer. And also from a legal perspective, what's wrong, what's right, and that sort of stuff. So I understand that. What's your view on legislation and government stepping in to sort of, I don't know, not help solve the issue, but, you know, address it in some way, whether that's quotas. I don't know what's talking about the event industry now, but positive discrimination, all that sort of stuff. What's your view on that? Are you favourable?
Well, the thing is, look, this is the irony of it all. There are already employment rights laws.
Yeah, of course.
There are already equality laws. Okay, so these laws exist. The issue is the culture of your organization and how you have taken the spirit of those laws within your organization. So there are already laws. The second thing is that there is now regulatory, well, soon to be mandatory, things like gender and ethnicity pay gap reporting. The government also said to the FTSE 250 and 100, you have until 2021 and 2024, I believe, to make sure you have at least one non-white board member. So these quotas have been set in place, and prior to the quotas, guidance after guidance after guidance was released. So the issue here is really now about accountability and probably some penalties. If you don't do X, Y, Z by X date, this will be the impact. And as I say, that may well fall at the same time as you're buying consumers voting with their feet. You know, I know we're going to go on to talk about social media, but now social media is the great leveler. It is democratizing most industries, which means that a challenger brand can absolutely emerge and basically get a foothold in the market that you might be being complacent about or ignoring.
No, you make a good point in that respect, and I mean, I think, you know, when you're changing human behaviour, either typically you have to provide an incentive or a disincentive. Right, and that's just the way it is. Just one final question on this. Because I could probably talk to you all day and don't want to. CVs and candidates, right? My experience, hands up, I've hired lots of people, but actually, in terms of interviewing people, I reckon over 1,000.
Yeah.
People of color, handful.
Yeah.
Right. And hiring them, it probably even fewer.
Yeah.
Now, those CVs have come to me through agencies, so it's somewhere along the line, something's going wrong somewhere.
Yeah.
In terms of CVs and things like that, and I was on a call the other week with Natasha Lale from Expo She held a recruitment thing. And there are a lot of people from ethnic and minority backgrounds on that call saying, I don't put my name on a CV. I don't put a picture on a CV. Would you endorse that? What's your view?
Well, again, that is against the backdrop of the fact that historically, anecdotally, in terms of our real lived experiences, identifying, from the get-go or very early in the process that you might be of a different ethnicity is a disadvantage.
Yeah.
That's the fact. And the stats and research shows that. If someone sees a name they don't recognize or assume not to be British, for example, they just put that one to the side. If they see, even me, the way I'm dressed, it's really hard not to realize that I'm black. Like
I realized it.
It's not even something that I can try and camouflage or hide. So it's a real risk. Before I started running my own business, I was at the behest, like completely at the behest of whatever the consciousness mindset of the hiring manager and company was. There was nothing I could do, and I can never quite pinpoint it either. Now I may suspect or sense because of experiences I've had, but there's nothing I could actually go back to the recruiter and say, I think they didn't hire me because I'm black.
No.
When in actual fact, the moment I walk through that door, if I know that it's been noticed. And so what you try to do as a person of color is minimize the disadvantages to yourself as much as possible. And that includes sometimes changing your name, leaving your name off. There's always that field on an application form that says your name and then what you want to be known as or something like that, and you'll find lots of people will put in Tom Smith,
Margaret.
Exactly. And that happens.
I'm joking, but
it happens a lot, so that way people don't have on your name. We see that happening, even when people talk about things like, another Indian call center, we say it very casually, but again, it's that same feeling. What are the connotations behind that? Lack of trust, lack of transparency, all of these things that inform the actual decisions we're making when hiring. So that's one of the reasons why up until this point, and I suspect this will continue, because it doesn't really matter how many of these conversations we have, it will be, as long as the system's been in place, is as long as it might take to dismantle it. And so in the meantime, in that interim, we've got to do what we can as individuals to diminish the impact that this inequality has on us.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, because I was thinking, how does Ashanti feel going forward? To make the change you want is massive, right? Right? You've got to take the quick win, or quick wins, any win you can get, and not get frustrated that you can't. You're not going to.
Absolutely,
you may change the world, but realistically,
you've got to be real. You've got to be real about it. I mean, you've got to be real about it, and so that is why we talk about things like diversifying the supply chain in the events industry, for example. Those are quicker wins because once you have your budget, you can then choose what suppliers you work with. Quicker wins. For some companies, because of their size, their recruitment strategy might take some time to change. Because there's so many cogs along the way and checkpoints that you're going to have to now identify and debias as much as possible. So there are some strategies that are much more long-term, and others that, as I say, you could decide this, like COVID, everybody's been reviewing their supplier list, let's face it, everybody. So, now that that's happening anyway, have a good look. How many social enterprises are on their local vendors, minority-owned businesses, or businesses that employ people of color, at least? How many of them are on your list? And now's your opportunity, because you're trying to cut costs, let's be very frank, and find ways to be more flexible with the way you work with suppliers. Now's a good time to tackle your supply chain.
Yeah, and Blacken Events obviously does that, right? You can provide like speakers, but also suppliers.
Yes, exactly. And so that's one of the reasons why Blacken Events exists, because it's that unapologetic place for you to go and find Black speakers and Black suppliers if you are organising an event.
Yeah. I'm going to move on because otherwise
please.
I feel but it's fascinating. So thank you. EventMind. What do you do?
Yeah, this is my baby. So, well, it's not a baby anymore, but you know,
teenager. Is it a teenager? No, how old is it?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Troubled teenager. I don't know.
Sometimes it can feel like that, but it's usually because the world is so troubled.
Yeah.
But so most companies struggle to choose the right event technology.
Yep.
They don't know who to trust, and they don't want to overspend. And what we do is provide trusted recommendations to companies who are running events as to the best event technology for them.
Okay. So I thought you were looking at
That's it.
I thought it was something else.
No, 20 seconds. That's it.
Do you then also go on and implement the project, or are you literally a middle person?
Yeah, we can do.
At least a middle man, I would have got completely.
Yeah. No. So yes, we do. However, here's one thing that I've realized over the years of, you know, being in this digital tech space is that it doesn't matter what you're doing. Ultimately, you still need to choose some form of technology, right? So we could tell you about the rest of the strategy, but ultimately, you're still going to have to make a choice as to what tools and platforms you're going to use. And what we can see right now, this year more than ever, is there needs to be more transparency and there needs to be more trust in the market in general when it comes to event technology. There are some clear segments of the market emerging where, you know, developers are developing platforms now. You've got agencies developing platforms. You've got pre-COVID event tech companies who've pivoted and added on their virtual. And then you've got those that came up in the COVID period. So there's a lot of choice and not a lot of trust at the moment in the market. And one of the things, because EventMind has always been tech agnostic, it's usually because I love tech in general, so it's very hard for me to commit to using one piece all of the time. So because we're tech agnostic, we've always given unbiased advice, and so that's why we are now really moving towards making sure we are the go-to resource for just finding out what the best or the right technology for your particular event is.
Sure, because I saw a post on LinkedIn today where you were talking about companies selling. Very right for the people that want it.
Yeah, and it's quite controversial because I know a lot of people feel differently about this. And but here's the thing, you know, I could decide tomorrow to create a platform. I can partner with some developers from a development house. I know enough about the market. I've been doing it for how long? I can develop a piece. I've been asked before. I've thought about whether it's something we need to be doing. I could do that tomorrow and go out there and start selling it to companies. But who really says that we have the expertise? Who says we can be trusted? Who says that we're going to actually deliver what it is that we're promising? How do I know if I'm buying or using your company that I'm not paying over the odds in the market? Some of the pricing we've seen is absurd and complicated. So there's all of these things that we at EventMind are now. We're starting to be like, no, this is kind of the price bracket that is reasonable for this particular type of event, or this technology can do trade shows. Because there's a lot, you know, in the early days of COVID in particular, I saw a lot of companies just saying pivot to virtual. I also saw a lot of this all-in-one. No, there's no all-inclusive package for events, virtual and online events. So we saw that happening, and what we're seeing now, like any market, is starting to mature. And now we're in a position where the smart event tech companies will make sure they market on their USP. If your thing is lead generation, say that. If your thing is just hybrid, say that. If your thing actually is the networking piece, say that. You don't want people buying your tech because you promised them to do the all-in-one. And then when they try to do the all-in-one, it can't work. And then you have a dissatisfied client and you get really a poor reputation.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, as I said in my last role, so between March and August, we were looking at a whole load of different suppliers to take a bunch of tech shows online in the short term.
Yes.
To replicate what we've done, but like virtual summits. And there was a lot of time spent with a lot of people, like committees, speaking to a lot of suppliers, when actually on reflection, we could have used someone like yourselves, cut through all that, had already had the knowledge.
Yeah.
And whilst we would have to pay you to do it, it would have been cheaper given all the resource that
you're running. I mean, we've seen companies come to us and they've been on like 75 demos. They still haven't made a decision.
Exactly. I sat on loads.
And there's no point. Yeah, there's no point. And the thing is, as well, is that, look, there's loads of things I could talk about demos all day. The thing is that you're talking to a salesperson.
Yeah.
That's not who you need to be talking to when you're first curious or trying to explore what you're using. You don't need to be talking to someone who's trying to sell you something. Sure. You need to talk to somebody who is going to show you what the tech is actually capable of and what it can do for you. So I think at the moment we have it's the wrong way around. And that's why we are now we are automating our ranking system that we've been using internally. Okay. And we're going to create an automated tool so people can just come on the website, type in, their criteria, and it will just bring up a short list. And the other thing is the optimum number is 2 or 3. When I see people having like lists of 5 or 10, that's just, again, going to waste your time. It's possible to bring it down to 2 or 3 options. You make a choice in that option, and then you make it work.
Yeah.
That's it.
And in your opinion, just what makes a good virtual event? Because you've been invited to loads, I'm sure.
Yeah.
We all started to attend all of them at the beginning, and then we were boring. So what are the key components of a good to mobilize someone now, especially when they've got fatigue of this sort of stuff?
Mm-hmm.
And even yourself, what would make you go to it?
Yeah, I mean, more generally speaking, I always say this, and people hate the answer. Who are you trying to get to come to your event, and what do you want them to do? Answer those 2 questions, and then that's what you provide.
Sure.
That's it. All these generic blogs out there with lists of 20 things you must do, all the tools you must do. You could be in the manufacturing industry, so 90% of that blog may not even apply to your target audience. Yeah. So it's about knowing who they are, what you want them to do, and what they also want from you, especially if you've got an established portfolio of events. And then you have to match it. It's very simple. I mean, yesterday I was having a conversation with another industry peer, actually, and she was saying, look, whoever comes up with a platform that sorts out this networking issue in the virtual space is going to be minted. And I was like, well, no. How do we make meaningful connections in real life? It's knowing who you are, knowing what you offer, and knowing which companies you offer that to well.
Yeah.
Then it's being in the right room with those people at the right time.
Yeah.
Technology is not ever going to replace you being able to articulate with clarity what you offer and who you want to work with. The same has to happen. It could be any platform. The organizer's job is to make sure that the right people are there, but it's your job as the attendee or the sponsor or to make sure that you have articulated clearly what it is you offer and you go into the room with the right people. That's just my view. Well, I don't think it's ever going to be,
Yeah, I think it's the same as it ever was. I mean, what do people want? How are you going to give it to them? The way that we deliver content and messaging has changed, but the central component of what we want to achieve has been the same.
I think so. I mean, technology, there's some jazzy stuff like, AI recommendation systems. So you can look at my interests, maybe my behavior online, my behavior at the event, and then match you with other people who are similar. Great. All you're doing is making it quicker, but it's still right room, right people. If I, though, cannot articulate what it is I do, who I serve, and I don't know who those people are, the tech still is useful because you can put me in the room and I won't know what to do either way.
Can you answer my desert island question?
Okay. Okay, go for it.
I ask people, which 2 people are you going to be taking on a desert island if you had to?
Oh, goodness.
What reasons?
Do you know what? I mean, you're asking me if I had to. The fact is I'm not a people person, so I wouldn't take people. So that's that. I'm not a people person.
Let's not say people then. What 2 things maybe?
Okay, I would take... Oh, this is a good question, actually. I'd take a pen and a pad. So that's 2 things, isn't it? So
that's all right. You can have that. I'll give you that as one.
Pen and pad. Yeah. And Diet Coke.
And a Diet Coke.
Yeah.
What are you going to do with a pen and pad?
I'm gonna write down all of my business ideas, my sales funnels.
Yeah, so if you don't make it, someone will stumble across it, and then
there you are. They'll become a millionaire.
Your legacy.
Exactly.
Ashanti, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I could have spoken to you for hours, but maybe we'll do it again another day. And I wish you all the very best with your many initiatives.
Yes, thank you.
It's all well deserving.